What is going on, everyone? Thank you for joining today. We've got Kan Lau from Red Seed Ventures, who is an investor and recently wrote a pretty amazing three-part article on DAOs, DAO tooling, and the future of DAO tooling. So we're happy to have him on the show today. Start to discuss what's going on with DAOs and kind of how that impacts the future of work and some of the things that they're looking or interested in the future of all of this. So with that, Ken, thank you for coming on today, man.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course. I read your articles. So the three-part series on DAOs as the future of work, and then kind of diving into the tooling and all of that, which I want to get into and discuss more because I'm super passionate about that, even here at Gigster. But I think to kick it off, like if you want to give us a quick intro into you and how you got into the space and what you find, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So the short of it is I joined Red Sea Ventures, which is like an early stage pre-seed seed fund about a year ago where we co-invest, we lead, we're pretty generalist, but we're actively looking at opportunities within Web3, including, NFTs and NFTs with its utility there as well as DAOs, the point of this conversation. I guess a bit of background about myself before we get into it. I was fortunately and really unfortunately a tech M&A banker at JPN for some time, where I actually got to work on some of the largest transactions in seed-board dynamics, but not the best for work-life dynamics.
For sure.
And and then after that, actually, I was at a CVC focused on investing in data infrastructure and cybersecurity and that sort of thing. But I really wanted to align my career path back to the consumer world, and I really aligned with my partners Scott and Paul at Red Sea Ventures in terms of their thesis of investing in next gen experiences for the consumer and the worker, and really focused on the end user experience. And that brought me over to Red Sea. They convinced me to come over here, and it's been great ever since. And now I started to build our own thesis within like the Web3 space, and it's been great the last year.
That's awesome, man. No, it's always cool to like hear people's kind of like journey, right? How they get into the space now, especially when you get like people that have been in the financial and banking space and now into Web3. It always brings like such an interesting point of view, to the space. But to focus on today, like this is something that we love and do a lot around is the future of work. But your three-part story, and I like how you broke it up too, right? So it's kind of DAOs as they are today, a lot of like what they are, the inherent upside to them and the future of work, but really kind of like tailing into like what they need to really succeed at scale into the tooling. So I mean, what drew you to start writing about and like researching into DAOs versus maybe crypto or NFTs or something else? What drew you to this topic?
Yeah, look, the original pull for me to get into the Web3 space was like the NFT craze last year. I feel like everyone else who was pulled in the space because just out of pure curiosity, I wanted to see what the tech was all about, and I wanted to see what everyone was hyped out all about. And really, when it comes to why I started looking to the DAOs, I really wanted to understand the benefits of blockchain tech when it came to the future of work, which is like a core investment theme and pillar for us in terms of what we invest in. And DAOs naturally piqued my interest. Something about an organization that's owned by employees, that have incentives to engage and contribute. That's run that's digitally native, run online, run by smart contracts, and having like a really essentially a community that pushes towards a shared mission, a shared goal, was eye-opening and pretty insightful for me to spend a lot of my time researching and understanding the true dynamics of what the promise of DAOs can really provide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's like I feel like as with all like new emerging tech, right? Like everyone kind of like takes at face value where things are today and expect that to be the end result. So everyone can be like, there's this, there's that. But again, it's like it's in its like infancy. I think might even still be too large a word to explain like how early on this stuff is, but it's also already seeing like a ton of traction, right? Like they had I think one of the big ones was like Constitution DAO, right? Almost bought the version of the US Constitution, which is incredible. But when you look at what is like attracting Actually, I'll ask you from two angles. It's like, what is attracting, like, I would say, like the common worker, right? Like, what would
Mhm.
attract one, a common worker to a DAO model? And then on the flip side of that, what would attract like a founder to start as a DAO versus a traditional LLC or C or S corp?
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of what attracts like the common person, it really boils down to a few reasons there. When you're starting to get super interested in Web3 and the curiosity that comes along with it, it's hard to start, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you generally want someone to hold your hand. I remember when I first started looking to the space, I was just buying dumb NFT projects
Sure.
and trying to get people within those communities to tell me like what this was all about. So it's difficult to get into the space,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of like social DAOs and DAOs out there that have the stated goal to like help you and educate you about the space. And in terms of what like the common person can really get from joining a DAO, it's really that online community
Mm-hmm.
that you align with, that you have the same mission with, whether that's building a product, whether that's investing, whether that's building towards some sort of mission. Um, the like DAOs today can really provide all of that, and there's some incentive alignment there, right? You
Right.
get some ownership, you
Mm-hmm.
get some governance tokens. You really can influence a project and show and contribute, which is something that you can't really do today if you're at the lowest level of like a centralized Web2 organization. So that's what I see as like the main benefits for the typical person to get into to DAOs as a whole. As
Mm-hmm.
for your other question though, as for founders, um, I think it really boils down to a couple things there as well. It's really the ease of pooling capital for that shared purpose of whatever you're trying to go for. So
Right.
I don't think there's ever been uh, in the history of any organization ever been the tooling where you can bring like 5, 10, 15, or hundreds of people really together within like a very confined period of time, to build towards like a specific purpose, whether that's like DeFi applications, whether that's like some technical product, whether that's like the DAO tools themselves. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's never been an opportunity to bring that together, and then that goes along with my other point of it being really providing large scale coordination and
Mm-hmm.
collaboration. Um, what's really cool that there's been a lot of these like almost like service DAOs that have been popping up out there
Right.
that bring together that collaboration from a distributed workforce that's never really existed
Mm.
before. So if you think of like Twally, which is like a McKinsey of Web3, and they're trying to be
Sure.
consultants in Web3, whether it's this new creative agency DAO called Everywhere DAO that's empowering creatives to collaborate
Mm-hmm.
and work together, because that information flow for creatives and the creator economy is like paramount to their success, because they always want new projects. They always want to collaborate with people. They will always want something new to work on and be creative with. And then
Right.
there's also from an investment perspective, like there was this investment DAO called Chain Force that was literally just announced yesterday. And it brought together like 300 to 400 people
Right.
to invest and bring ideas together, invest together. So that collaboration with like-minded individuals and collaborating across like geographies is just an incredible experience that um, has never really been accessible until today.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's like the interesting part to like talk around, right? Is that
Yeah.
when we talk about DAOs and them doing these things, in my mind, it really like you really have to. I don't want to say like forget everything you know, but stop making like trying to make associations backwards, right? So stop trying to
Mhm.
think that a DAO is going to like replace a traditional company, right?
Yeah.
Or that it's like, or you're going to work the same way you do in your, your Web2 company the same way, or your whatever company in the same way that you will in a DAO. Like it's substantially different. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think you had mentioned it there before, but it's around like organizing people quickly. And I think that's what I find like extremely compelling around it, right? It's this ability that you can quickly mass together a large amount of people with a singular focus and then organize them in a way to like achieve a goal. Um,
Hmm.
I think we saw that with Constitution DAOs and other ones before, but it always makes me think that like in the future, um, you know, and this is my prediction, like will DAOs like will we get to a point in the future where there are no more like LLCs or regular companies? I don't think so.
Yeah,
But what I
I'm gonna
do
agree with you
think,
there.
yeah, and like what I do think will be substantially different is that the idea of like what a business is going to fundamentally change.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You know, I had ran a poll on LinkedIn and asked like, so if a company was no longer around after a year, would you have considered it to A, failed, or B, succeeded in its mission?
Hmm.
And it was like overwhelmingly it failed. Um, which I think is like a pretty like broken notion. Like, why can't a company or why can't people come together around something and be like, look, we're going to achieve this goal in 6 months or a year, and once we're done, we'll move on to the next thing. I mean, do you
Yeah.
see that in your projection of the future of being like a new way to work and like DAOs being that vehicle for it?
Yeah. So I honestly think every DAO is really its own startup. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like a vast majority of startups fail,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they a lot of them fail spectacularly. A lot of them can't even get off their ground. A lot of them fail within 6 to 12 months, like you said. And I guess it just really depends on your definition of fail for an organization. Because if you talk about like a research project, for example, when if that's like your career or when you're in school,
Mm-hmm.
you're researching towards like a certain goal and it ends in 6 to 12 months. And in that 6 to 12 months, you achieve some sort of thesis or hypothesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is considered a success. I think when
Right.
people think about organizations, they think about something that's trying to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And if a organization fails and you bring together a group of people and you don't end up, monetizing, and then everyone, dissipates afterwards and the organization, goes into the ether, then that's why people think it fails.
Right.
So it's honestly just completely how you think about it. If you if you create a DAO with the purpose of of monetization,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that's what it's akin to, like the Web 2 world of what people think organizations are. But if you create a DAO with the intention to, have the free flow of information, within a community, towards some sort of shared goal, that's a completely different goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't consider that failure. I consider that a success because you're allowing the transfer of information and ideas among a community. And that transfer of information, like knowledge and information, is one of the hardest resources to get today. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're allowed to share that information and that knowledge that you have with a group of other people, and maybe those group of people take that information and build something from there, I would consider that a success. And that's really the entire nature of what DAOs are meant to be. They're
Mm-hmm.
meant to be those organizations that, can really provide that spark, and that spark in ideas for something new.
Mm-hmm. And so that, and I mean, so that's a compelling way to think about it, right? And like maybe I'm off base because you made a good point there, right? Like, so businesses are established to generate revenue, right?
Mhm.
And establish profits. And I think that it was Elon Musk said, like, if a business isn't generating profits, why does it exist?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, you make a good point there, right? And it's that, so if a business is not generating revenue and dissolves, then it did not achieve what its inherent goal is.
Mhm.
Um, but to your point too, is acting as like this like catalyst mechanism that could like
Yeah.
spawn into something new. I think is actually a pretty like compelling thread to like pull down, right? Because when I look at DAOs and what they're able to do, and this is maybe even more towards like the Web3 space, and it gives, what I'm gonna say does give some like terrifying remnants to like ICOs.
Yeah.
Um, but what I do think is interesting is that if you're structured as a DAO, and maybe people are more, responsible these days, um, that you can use it as a way to crowd together a lot of people with a similar interest and fundraise to start building MVPs of what your product is, and
Yeah.
let ownership retain within the community and your potential customer base, rather than,
Yeah.
you know, having it go externally to someone that may not have any um, like care into what your mission or like values mean. They're just wondering if they can flip a buck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't want to say VC money because of your presence here. But you know, like, you know, when I look at it in that idea of having your community be able to own a bit of it and then have influence back, I think is really, really compelling. But, you know, as it sits today, right, like there's obviously, like we said before, it's in its child state, infancy state, embryonic
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to do, but I think that what you go into your article a lot, and I'm curious to hear like what you are seeing as trends in the space, is that really one of the things that's slowing DAOs down is that they don't have the tools
Yeah.
to kind of achieve in their missions. Like in your mind, like what are maybe some of the top challenges DAOs might be
Yeah.
facing kind of in the near future?
Yeah. I mean, the DAO tooling part of it is what make a DAO successful, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have the tooling that supports an organization, then it's just out of pure inefficiency, it's going to dissipate as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what really led me to research like DAO tooling as a whole in the first place. I actually joined. This was more of like a social DAO. I was like a founding member of a social DAO that helped drive the advancement of AAPI empowerment through like Web3 infrastructure and community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I came out of that experience so incredibly frustrated.
Right.
It was insane that there was so much noise in the Discord. There was terrible governance. There was lack of accountability and communication from the founding team.
Yep.
It was difficulty in finding, the tooling and onboarding to actually organize the community itself. And there was no, and in that specific one, I'm not saying this is for all DAOs. In that specific one, there was no mechanism to actually submit proposals to affect change. So I actually ended up rage quitting that DAO, and before, after I tried to change it,
Yeah.
um, internally, with like getting a group of members saying like, hey, like, why aren't you building any of these infrastructure using DAO tooling? And they just didn't really know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was so incredibly frustrating to me. The fact that they didn't have the tools to really understand how a DAO should work structurally, and how you can really continuously engage the community to continue to support the DAO itself. So from a DAO tooling perspective, I'm most interested in even like the simplistic infrastructure that doesn't exist today. So if you think about Web3 CRM tools,
Mm.
doesn't exist. People use like Notion right now. People use like a variety of other Web2 CRMs, but nothing is really digitally native within or Web3 native rather.
Mm-hmm.
There's this company called 3RM, which the founder Jackson's incredible, and he's trying to build like that sales mechanism, but there's still a lot to be done in that space. Onboarding infrastructure, like the barrier to entry, like I mentioned earlier, and over this call is very, very high. It's hard for someone to get started.
Mm-hmm.
So creating that onboarding infrastructure and those guides to get a new contributor to join a DAO and really be, like a full community member is difficult at the moment. From a governance perspective, keeping members engaged over time is really important. I was actually talking to someone at Empire DAO the other day, and this guy worked for DX DAO, which is essentially creating decentralized tools in DeFi. And he was one of their founding members, and he was so incredibly frustrated that he started taking a step back, even though he was one of the founding members, because his influence over time was capped. So if you have those sort of incentives that cap your influence over a DAO, especially a DAO that's trying to create technical products,
Mm-hmm.
like that's a problem. He
Right.
was a core member that was building some of like the core infrastructure and tools that the DAO was providing, and now he's stepping back because he feels like it's getting too noisy and the
Mm-hmm.
governance isn't there. So he's still like a true supporter of DAOs, and the promise it can provide. It's just at the moment like these governance tools aren't customized, and to um, it's difficult to maintain the engagement over time. And that goes into like my last point of like a tool that needs to be built. It's like just member experience and engagement tools, and really creating those hooks to keep members involved, whether that's in like service DAOs more project oriented, whether in more social DAOs, it's creating in real life events, or like providing that one-to-one or many connections within community members. Like there needs to
Mm-hmm.
be these engagement tools to keep people interested in the DAO itself.
So, I mean, I think I think that as a employee retention tool, I think that
Yeah.
even the non Web3 sector has yet to truly figure out. But yeah, so you bring up an interesting point. I'm like, I want to dig on it like a little bit. So you mentioned that that one of the core contributors eventually started losing his influence over it. Um, I had I was reading an article, and this might have come out of yours, but like pulled a stat out, that Chainalysis had recently published a study, the top 10 major DAOs, that less than 1% of all members have 90% of voting power,
Yeah.
which, like, I don't know if that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, because when you talk about the noise and you talk about all this stuff going on, like having having a group that can make executive decisions like on the fly and quick, I think is the only
Yeah.
way that this stuff will work.
Yeah.
Which leads into like a hybrid DAO, right? Where you do have like a centralized like FTE team that is able to make, these game time and real time decisions a lot. And I think a lot of it too is for like nuancy stuff. Cause a lot of people be like, oh, DAOs, well, how do you deal with, like invoicing and all this other stuff? It's like, well, if you actually have like the centralized team that's there, but you open up a portion of your business to the community to hear feedback and actually start to get some of this like fractional work in. But I mean, do you see DAOs ever being around in like the purest sense, or will it always be, or do you think that really the future is more on like this hybrid DAO model?
I mean, that's a really great question, and I think it really depends on the goal of
Mm,
the DAO itself. So I think there needs to be some governance tool that's necessary where it really creates that hybrid model that you're talking about, where there needs to be not necessarily someone or a team running the ship, but someone like setting the direction.
mm-hmm.
Because if there's no direction and you have a million cooks in the kitchen,
Right.
it's it goes haywire, right? Like it's hard to run any sort of community organization. Even like if you go back to college, like if you let every single person have the same say in the direction
Of a
of a
group.
group,
Yeah.
like what are you gonna
It's
do?
never gonna happen. Yeah. And
It's
that,
never gonna happen.
yeah, it has all this upside too, right? Like, I was reading this article and it was pretty. It had like a pretty compelling like I guess upside for DAOs, right? And it's what I hadn't thought before, right? So like in a DAO right now, it kind of consists of like two member types, right? You have your core members, and your core contributors, which are kind of like
Mhm.
full-time employees, and then you have like edge contributors, and these are people that can much more like fluidly come into the DAO. They can join the Discord, they can start contributing, and then they might have like a high churn value as they lose interest because as you said, like the incentive drivers and tooling for that are not super baked in. But because you have this like permissionless way that anyone can come in and start participating, it turns into like a much more like bottom up and opt in model, which
Yeah.
kind of inverts the talent sourcing model that we see today. So you kind of like are flipping it on its head.
Mhm.
And like with that, they had kind of outlined like three upsides to that. Is that because like typical hiring right now is classically impacts minorities due to ingrained prejudice, right? So
Yeah.
if you allow anyone to come in and start working, you can look at their work rather than at the person and say, is this person
Yeah.
contributing or not? It helps continue like this idea of flexibility that started with the gig economy. People can be, the future of work is going to be more fluid, right? People are going to be
Mhm.
moving in and out, and this supports that. And then helps like reduce, and this was a new vocab word for me today that I learned, so we'll share it with you. But it helps reduce like frictional unemployment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So frictional unemployment, which you might already know, but for anyone watching that doesn't know, but frictional employment is basically the latency between people who wish to work and when they start work, right? So if you quit a job and then you're going to your next job, that gap time is the frictional unemployment. It's the same thing with like Uber drivers in between having rides. That is technically frictional unemployment.
Got
But
it.
that was really cool to think around that, like inverting the talent model and what that means for the future of work.
Mm-hmm.
So I said a
Got
lot
it.
there, but just
Yeah.
ramblings.
Yeah, no worries. So I think you made a few good points there for DAOs, that it's based, one, it's based on merit.
Mm-hmm.
Two, people don't care about your real world identity. They care about your digital identity. And if you can really provide the insights or work that will contribute. And then you talk about, frictional unemployment. And I think that's something that can be somewhat solved by
Mm-hmm.
DAOs. If you think about the average person who participates in DAOs, many of them are in multiple DAOs. So
Mm-hmm.
in that frictional unemployment time period, where maybe they just finished a project in one DAO, they can immediately start working on another project in another DAO that they're interested in as well. So it
Mm-hmm.
really solves that like time efficacy there that that doesn't that doesn't exist for like the Uber drivers of the world, or the other example that you provided.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it is pretty interesting. I think DAOs have give people the ability to be a part of multiple organizations where they can really use their time effectively and work and or contribute or just be a participant in their downtime when that doesn't really exist today, for centralized organizations.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, well said. Well said, right? I think the future for it is going to be very, very compelling. But I know that we're bumping up on the time here, so I have to ask, what are you going to write on next? Are you sticking with DAOs or what? It was a very, very good read. It was nice, well done articles.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm definitely sticking with like the Web3 space as a whole. I'm pretty interested in continuously building my thesis in what DAO tools are the most interesting, and from like a go to market perspective, right? I think you can build a bunch of DAO tools for like the various areas that I mentioned before. But where you sit on top of the tech stack is like really important. Like whether you sit on top of like Discord, for example, and be like a Trojan horse to effectively
Mm-hmm.
effectively change what people communicate on within like the Web3 world. That like that's pretty interesting. There's the onboarding side, the member engagement side. I really want to like dig further deep in, and then along with that comes what utility comes with NFTs as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a pretty interesting space that I'm looking into as well. But I'm everything within Web3 has always been pretty interesting. I've been curious about learning. There's so much to learn, and I feel like if you don't look at the Web3 space for a week, you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of already getting screwed.
Already behind,
Something
man.
new already popped up.
It's very true.
But
It's very true.
yeah, but those are some of the couple of things I'm interested in right at the moment.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I appreciate the time so much. I really do. If anyone wants to follow you or check you out, what's the best places to do that?
Yeah, so you can either find me on Twitter at KenMFLAU, my last name Lau, or just like add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat. Feel free to DM me. I'm always interested in talking about people who are curious in the space.
Awesome, man. Well, we will also post the links to follow down into the comments below. But man, thank you so much again for the day. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for having me. Thanks,
All right,
Corey.
brother. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
All right. And with that, that was Mr. Kan Lau. Really good stuff. Like I said, I'll put the links to his articles down here below. They're great reads, especially when we're looking into like the future, like tooling and DAO, because they're hitting on a problem that a lot of Web3 has, not just DAO. It's like it's time for the infrastructure builds and investment to be coming, and that's going to be happening more and more and more. But with that, I look forward to seeing you next time. And Ken, hit the outro, brother.